Okay, so as I said, so we're just going to check our preferences. Whoops, edit preferences, and you can just go to the first one, which is general. Now, there's heaps and heaps of preferences here. You know, I'm not going to go through many of them, only a couple, but you know, if you've got Photoshop at home, you can fiddle around with these preferences. You can have something auto-update open documents. I don't usually have that on just because if I'm working on something, I might want to save it as a new version, and I don't necessarily want to do an auto-save. Plus, sometimes that takes a bit of time. Okay, so especially if you're working on a really large document, but you know, you would need to decide whether you want that on or not. Okay, so if you go to the interface section there, I've got mine on the lightest grey colour. Now, as I explained with Illustrator, you know, it's better to have like a neutral grey background so that it doesn't interfere with how you see the, you know, the image, the colour of the image that you've got on the screen. So I prefer to have either the lightest grey or even the second lightest grey, but one of those. I think that is just too dark, you know, those dark ones. So, but for some reason they've made that the default now to have dark backgrounds. Okay, and then another one, if you want to have a look at, in options, it's got this one that says open documents as tabs. I have that unticked, okay, so it's an empty box. The reason being, when you open, so when we were using Illustrator, if you had several documents open, you'd see they'd have tabs across the top, and click on the tab and go to the different document. In Photoshop, if you're using it for montages and things where you're putting, you know, other photos into things, I personally find it easier to have them all floating and I can see what there is, and then I can drag photos, you know, from one to another. But you know, it's if you've used Photoshop before and you prefer it in tabs, you know, have that by all means. But I preferred the floating panel, so I have that unticked. So maybe if you've been using Photoshop for a while, you'll, you know, work your own preference. I mean, that's probably because I've been using Photoshop from really older versions where they didn't even come in tabs; they were always floating panels. So that's just how I prefer it. But I do prefer that as a way of working. So anyway, so I've got that one unticked, and I think that's the only other thing that you could change. I can't remember where it is. It's the history. Here it is. So in the performance category, there's a history panel, which means it's like multiple undos. Okay, so every time you do something, it'll record a step in the history panel. But by default, it only records the last 20 steps. Okay, which sounds a lot, but if you're using the brush or something, every brush stroke is one step. Okay, so you can very quickly get up to 20 steps. So you can increase that if you want. It does just use up more memory, that's all. So it's using it in temporary memory and whatever. But there's the thing, history states. So I don't know what the maximum is actually. Oh, 1,000, there you go. I'm not going to bother changing mine. But if you think you're going to make a lot of mistakes, then it's, you know, that can be handy to increase that. Okay, so, all right. So that's all we need, you know, so it's in the performance category. Yeah. The other ones don't need to worry about too much. Transparency, just showing how it shows transparency, which is just those grey and white checks. Oh, units and rulers. Okay, so if you've got the ruler showing across the top, just what unit is on there. You can change this depending on what you're creating. So if you're creating something that's going to be printed, then you might have it in centimetres or millimetres. If you're creating something for the screen, like for a website, then it's probably going to be in pixels. Okay, so just, I mean, mine's on centimetres at the moment, just something like that is probably okay. But just so long as you know what you've got it on, and because if you're using that as a guide for, you know, if you want it like 2 centimetres, but actually you've got it on pixels, okay, you need to be aware of that. And just things like colours of things. All right. So you can just press OK there once you've changed those things. tools down here. So we'll be going through a few of these things, but you know, like I said, very similar to Illustrator, you've got tools that are grouped together. So if they've got a black triangle in the corner, if you click and hold on there, all right, you've got ones that are similar, so the marquee tool, lasso tool. Now notice also that it'll have the keyboard shortcut next to it, but in a group it has the same letter shortcut. But if I wanted to, say I wanted the crop tool, but I've got the slice tool showing, but I know it's in that same group, if I press Shift and the keyboard shortcut, so Shift C, it'll cycle through the tools that are in that group. Okay, so that means knowing the keyboard shortcuts, obviously, but if you use that list that I've got on the Moodle, okay, it's really good to remember keyboard shortcuts. Like there'll just be a few that you'll use quite a lot. Okay. All right, so you've got sort of various selection tools grouped up here. Then you've got some kind of painting and repair tools here, and then the pen and the type tool is grouped a bit further down. Okay, and then you've got your colour swatches. Okay, it's a little bit different to Illustrator. Illustrator had like a fill colour and a stroke colour. This has got a foreground colour and a background colour. Okay, so if you just click on it, you'll get this colour picker up. Okay, and you can just click anywhere on here and then click somewhere in this section to choose the colour for things. Okay, if you know, if you're doing a particular colour and you've got the values of it, like RGB or CMYK, okay, they show up here and you can add those as well. All right, what else? You can switch the foreground and the background colours. Normally the foreground colour is the one that's, if you're going to fill an object with something, it'll use whatever's on the foreground colour there. Okay. If you want to switch them around, see it's got an arrow, like a double-headed curved arrow there. You can switch the foreground, background, or X is the keyboard shortcut for that. So that'll just toggle foreground to background there. And also, if you want to quickly get to black and white, they're called the default colours. So the letter D is the keyboard shortcut for the default colours. Okay, D and then X to switch them around if you need to. All right, so then on the panels on the right-hand side, I mean, I'll go through these as we use them, but just a couple here. So you've got, this is the essentials thing. The layers panel, okay, now with Photoshop, we didn't use layers too much in Illustrator. They kind of work slightly differently, but you'll find that in Photoshop, layers are really useful. Okay, so if imagine you're making a, you know, a montage, an image with a number of other images in it, okay, which is what we'll be looking at today. Each image you should put on a separate layer. So if you think of layers like just pieces of paper on top of each other, okay, and so you can turn one or another off individually, you can edit it individually. If they were all on the one layer, so like on a photo, if you bring in a photo, it's just one layer, you know, you'll find it hard to move things around or to edit them. So, and we will be having a look at layers. And just so you know where the history panel is, it's this one near the top that's got 3 squares and then an arrow that goes up. Okay, see up the top of the panels here, if you click on that, there's your history. And so what it'll have all the steps that you've done. We haven't done anything so far, that's why there's nothing there. Okay, but it'll be like recording the steps, and you can just go back in time, you know, that's right. Yep. So I'll show you how that works when we do things. And also when you're got a certain tool selected, you'll get different options at the top here. So every tool, will have slightly different options. So I'm just clicking down the tools and it'll be showing different things because they're the options that relate to that particular tool. Okay, now let me just check that I have put, okay, so on the P drive, I have put some cars. Actually, I don't need to